If you're here, you already know that Game of Thrones isn't just a show that ended. It's a cultural phenomenon that refuses to die. And honestly, the drama surrounding it might be even more entertaining than some of the actual episodes. Today, we're diving into something that's been heating up the fandom lately. Fresh revelations from the cast about that infamous finale. George R.R. Martin's cryptic hints about potential sequels and whether HBO can actually pull off redemption for this franchise. Because let me tell you, the tea that's been spilling recently is absolutely scalding. Grab your dragon glass and settle in because we've got a lot to unpack. So here's where things get really interesting. Sophie Turner, who brought Sansa Stark to life for 8 seasons, recently dropped some comments that have the entire fandom talking. And when I say dropped, I mean she basically confirmed what we've all suspected for years. Even the actors weren't happy with how their stories ended. Now, Sansa actually got one of the better conclusions, right? Queen in the North. Independence for her people. Coming full circle from that naive girl in season 1 to a legitimate ruler. But here's the thing Turner revealed. She was apparently one of the few satisfied with her character's ending. The implication? Most of the cast walked away from that finale feeling, let's just say, unfulfilled. And look, we've heard pieces of this before. Emilia Clarke has given multiple interviews where she talked about how difficult Daenerys' ending was for her. Not because her character died, but because of how rushed and jarring that transformation felt. She spent years building this character who genuinely believed she was breaking the wheel, liberating people, being different from the tyrants before her. Then, in the span of 2 episodes, she's burning children alive. The whiplash was real, and Emilia felt it just as much as we did. Kit Harington has been equally candid, admitting the finale had mistakes and needed more careful crafting. But here's where it gets even more interesting. A few days ago, Kit opened up about that petition. You know the one. Nearly 2 million signatures demanding HBO remake Season 8 with competent writers. That petition that became a meme, a movement, and a symbol of fan disappointment all at once. Kit's response was fascinating because it was so human. He admitted that despite his own dissatisfaction with certain creative choices, the petition genuinely angered him. And you know what? I actually get it. These actors poured years of their lives into this production. Kit mentioned the Battle of Winterfell took 55 nights to film, and he was present for around 40 of those nights. That's brutal. That's dedication on a level most of us can't even comprehend. But here's my take, and this is where Zaldriz's Exio keeps it real with you. You can acknowledge the incredible work the cast and crew put in while still recognizing that the writing failed them. These things aren't mutually exclusive. The petition wasn't an attack on the people who worked themselves to exhaustion creating those battle sequences. It was a cry from millions of fans who felt betrayed by storytelling that didn't honor what came before. Kit also tried to explain that the shortened final seasons were due to cast exhaustion, not writing problems. And honestly, I'm calling nonsense on that. 6 episodes for the final season instead of 10 isn't just a trim. It's a fundamental restructuring that clearly hurt the narrative pacing. If exhaustion was the real issue, spread those 10 episodes over a longer production schedule. HBO wanted more Game of Thrones. The budget was there. The solution was obvious. The truth is, those final seasons felt rushed because they were rushed. Character arcs that should have unfolded over multiple seasons got compressed into single episodes. Daenerys' descent into madness, Jaime's redemption and regression, the Night King being defeated halfway through the final season. These weren't creative choices born from exhaustion. They were structural failures in storytelling. Now let's talk about the elephant in the room, or should I say, the dragon in the throne room. HBO desperately wants to continue the Game of Thrones story, but they've backed themselves into a creative corner, and it's entirely because of how Season 8 ended. Think about it. They've tried to develop a Jon Snow sequel series. It collapsed. Why? Because what story is there to tell? Jon's in exile beyond the wall, exactly where he was happiest anyway. His arc is complete, even if the completion felt unsatisfying. Bringing him back risks reopening wounds without offering meaningful development. The same problem exists for pretty much every character who survived. Sansa ruling the North. What's the conflict? Bran as king. Where's the dramatic tension when he can literally see the future? Arya sailing west of Westeros. Sure, that could be interesting, but it's so disconnected from everything Game of Thrones was about that it might as well be a different show entirely. This is what happens when you tie up your narrative with such finality that you strangle it. The ending wasn't just bad because it was rushed or because character motivations didn't make sense. It was bad because it closed doors so aggressively that there's nowhere interesting left to go. Every potential sequel either feels unnecessary or risks contradicting the finality that the show insisted upon. Sophie Turner herself acknowledged this, noting that returning to a direct sequel seems both risky and pointless, despite the widespread dissatisfaction. And she's absolutely right. The problem isn't lack of characters or interesting settings in Westeros. The problem is that Season 8 resolved its conflicts so abruptly and decisively that any continuation either undermines that ending or has nothing meaningful to engage with. This is why HBO has pivoted so hard into prequels. House of the Dragon, A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, the proposed Aegon's Conquest series. These all have the advantage of source material and the freedom to tell stories without the shadow of that finale hanging over them. Speaking of those prequels, let's talk about George R.R. Martin, because this man continues to be both the franchise's greatest asset and most frustrating figure. In a recent interview with a Spanish publication, Martin discussed his involvement in upcoming HBO projects. He confirmed most of them are prequels, which we knew. But here's the interesting part. He also stated they're actively working on potential sequels to the original series. He was careful not to promise anything concrete, but the fact that he's publicly acknowledging sequel development is significant. Now, before we get too excited, let's remember this is the man who's been promising the winds of winter for over a decade. George Martin's timeline and reality's timeline don't always align. But the fact that HBO is still exploring sequel possibilities tells us something important. They know the ending left money on the table. They know the demand exists. The question is whether they can find a creative solution that doesn't feel like a desperate cash grab. Here's my theory, and this is pure Zaldriz's XCO speculation. If a season 9 or sequel series happens, it won't be a direct continuation. It'll be a soft reboot or reimagining set years or decades after the finale, allowing them to revisit familiar locations and possibly some characters while telling a genuinely new story. Think of it like how The Mandalorian revitalized Star Wars by going sideways instead of forward. Martin has also been heavily involved in A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, which premieres January 19th. He's visited the set, praised the cast, and seems genuinely enthusiastic about this project in ways he notably wasn't about the later seasons of Game of Thrones. His public criticism of House of the Dragon's showrunners versus his apparent satisfaction with the Night production tells us he's learned from past mistakes and is exercising more creative control. He's also confirmed active collaboration with writer Mattson Tomlin on the Aegon's Conquest series. No production timeline yet, but the fact that Martin is this involved suggests he's not letting HBO run wild with his universe anymore. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, and George apparently decides to actually participate in the adaptation process. Let's zoom out for a moment and talk about what Game of Thrones actually accomplished. Because despite that ending, its impact on television is undeniable. This show did for fantasy television what Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings did for fantasy film. It legitimized the genre for mainstream audiences. Before Thrones, fantasy was niche. It was for nerds, geeks, people who attended conventions. After Thrones, fantasy became prestige television. It became water cooler conversation. It became something your parents watched and discussed. The show established templates that dozens of series have tried to replicate. Morally complex characters, political intrigue, willingness to kill major players, massive scale, and that sense that anything could happen. Some succeeded in capturing elements of that formula. Most didn't. But the influence is everywhere. Here's the tragic irony, though. Game of Thrones also established a terrible precedent for disappointing finales. It proved that even the most beloved, culturally dominant show can completely fumble its ending and tarnish its legacy. We're seeing this pattern repeat with other major series, and that's concerning for the medium as a whole. But A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms represents something different. Based on the trailers and Martin's descriptions, this isn't trying to be Game of Thrones 2.0. It's more intimate, more character-focused, more traditionally heroic. Dunk is a classic underdog protagonist. Noble, honorable, not born to greatness, but embodying it more than those who were. This is a shift toward more conventional fantasy storytelling, just set in Westeros. Will it achieve the same massive success as the original? Probably not. It might not even match House of the Dragon's viewership, but it could influence the fantasy genre in a different direction, towards smaller-scale, character-driven narratives that don't need to be sprawling political epics to work. Quick update on House of the Dragon, because we can't talk about the future of this franchise without mentioning the Dance of the Dragons. Season 3 still doesn't have a specific release date beyond this year, with most analysts predicting a summer premiere. Showrunner Ryan Condal recently confirmed they've submitted initial episodes to HBO executives, and apparently everyone's pleased with what they're seeing. Meanwhile, production has already begun on Season 4, which has been confirmed as the final season. There was speculation that if Season 3 performed exceptionally well, HBO might extend the series for 2 additional seasons. That's been definitively shut down. 4 seasons and done. Honestly, that might be the smartest decision they could make. Tell the complete story of the dance. Tell it well and end on your own terms before you overstay your welcome. House of the Dragon has done something crucial for this franchise. It proved that the Game of Thrones brand could recover from that finale. The first season was genuinely excellent television that reminded people why they fell in love with Westeros in the first place. Season 2 had some pacing issues but maintained quality. If they stick the landing with seasons 3 and 4, this could be the redemption arc the franchise desperately needed. Here's my bottom line, and this is where we get real. Game of Thrones will never escape the shadow of its finale. That's just reality. But the franchise is bigger than those final episodes. The first 4 seasons represent some of the best television ever made. The world Martin created is rich enough to support multiple compelling stories. And HBO's commitment to prequels shows they understand the path forward isn't trying to fix what's broken, but building something new on a stronger foundation. Will we get a season 9? Maybe, eventually, in some form. Should we get one? That's debatable. The cast clearly has mixed feelings. The creative challenges are substantial, and there's a real risk that any attempt to course correct would just make things worse. What I want to see is HBO learning from their mistakes. Let stories breathe. Don't rush to conclusions. Trust your writers, but also trust your source material when you have it. And for the love of the 7, involve George R.R. Martin in meaningful ways instead of sidelining the man who created this entire universe. The Iron Throne story might be finished, but the realm of Westeros is far from exhausted. There are still dragons to ride, songs to sing, and tales to tell. The question is whether HBO has the patience and wisdom to tell them right. That's it for today's deep dive. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you want a season 9, or should they let the original series rest? Are you excited for a Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, or are you more invested in House of the Dragon's conclusion? And what stories from Westeros' history do you most want to see adapted? If you enjoyed this analysis, make sure you're subscribed to Zaldraz's Axio and hit that notification bell. We've got more Thrones content coming, including breakdowns of the night premiere when it drops. Until next time, Valar Morghulis, everyone.